All right, I think I'm going to get us started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's advocacy workshop. This is the second in a series of volunteer workshops that we're holding this year to help you feel more empowered to be a farmland advocate. A few housekeeping notes at the top here. We will be recording this session today and we'll share it online afterwards. We'll also be sure to share the link to the recording with you after it's published. We're also going to end today with a little Q&A session, so please feel free to share your questions using the Q&A feature during the webinar, and we can address those when we have a chance. And without further ado, we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to pass it over to Jeff Swinehart, who is our presenter today.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Welcome, everyone. Glad that you can participate here. We'll run through the presentation, then as Claire said, we'll open it up for Q&A, but hopefully you feel a little bit more empowered and informed how things advance in terms of policies and local land use related issues by the end of this and how you can be engaged. So just something we always like to highlight. So we're currently sitting at 621 farms that are preserved and over 38,400 acres. So great numbers. Still need to increase those to make sure that agriculture stays viable here in Lancaster County. So what's on the agenda? We're just going to talk about some policy related issues, state, federal, local level, the local issues that matter and how you can dig into those, how you can utilize your voice to advocate for the protection of farmland. And then we're going to wrap it up at the end with some takeaways and those Q&As. So funding and policy landscape. So obviously, we're looking at 4 different branches of government basically here, top down at the federal level, which at the federal level, there is funding for farmland preservation. There is funding for conservation work. And when we say conservation work, we mean that water quality work that we're doing. And then obviously there's various policies at the federal level that impacts agriculture. One most notable is the Farm Bill, as an example, that has a big implication on agriculture and agricultural programming and funding of programs, which is still currently in discussion at the federal level. You come down to the state level, obviously the state itself has policies related to agriculture. There is this state farmland preservation program. So there's policies around that. Obviously, the General Assembly, then in partnership, with the governor's office, is making decisions on policies that affect agriculture and affects farmland preservation and funding of farmland preservation. And certainly, there is dollars available at the state level for farmland preservation, and there's dollars available for that water quality work on the conservation side. Come down one more step, we're at the county level now. So obviously the county commissioners make an allocation of funding for farmland preservation every year. The county itself operates the state county farmland preservation program known as the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board. And then the county also provides guidance in terms of planning for the local level at the municipal level. And then down at the lowest level is the municipal level, our townships, boroughs, city of Lancaster, they're all at the municipal level. And at the municipal level is really where all the land use policies happen. So all the control in terms of land use is at the local level. The rest of those branches of government really have no implications on local land use policies, other than at the state level, you have the municipalities planning code, which is a guiding document. So that's really important to know when you think about what we all experience on a day-to-day basis, as we travel around where we live, it's those land use implications that we probably experience the most. And again, happens at that local level. And then some municipalities are funding preservation on a case-by-case basis, not every municipality, and really only a few in Lancaster. So LFT and state policy. So at the state level, the State Farmland Preservation Program is known as the Agricultural Conservation Easement Purchase Program. We are not connected to that. We are a standalone, separate nonprofit land trust. There is a statute called the Preservation and Conservation Easements Act that was approved by the General Assembly that we have to follow, but we are completely separate from the State Farmland Preservation Program, whereas the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board is authorized under the State Farmland Preservation Program. Their particular guidelines have to be approved at the state level, and they receive funding directly from the state to preserve farmland in Lancaster County. We do work collaboratively with the Ag Preserve Board. It's one of the reasons that I believe Lancaster County leads the nation in farmland preservation is because of the collaboration between a county entity and a private nonprofit organization. And we are constantly referring landowners back and forth and really directing landowners to whichever program best meets their needs. I'll also note that we do hold about 50 conservation easements jointly between the two organizations as well. So when we talk about preservation funding for Lancaster Farmland Trust, most of the funding that we're utilizing to preserve farmland is raised through private contributions, individuals, private foundations. We do receive a grant from the county commissioners. This year, it's the 21st consecutive year of receiving a grant. That grant has varied in the amount. In the early days, it was $500,000 to $1 million. For about the last dozen or so years, we're at about $250,000. And then municipal funds, they are limited. It is an area where we think there's real potential, especially at the local level for the local community really to control their landscape. At the federal level, that's through NRCS. It's the ASAP-ALE program. We've utilized that for about half a dozen projects. It's a federal program. It comes with a lot of red tape. There's a lot of barriers there for our typical farmer that we work with to have a comfort level participating in that program. And then at the state, this Department of Agriculture, there is the Land Trust Reimbursement Program. This is specifically for land trusts where we can seek reimbursement for the transaction expenses related to preserving the farm. And transaction expenses include things like the appraisal, a boundary survey, legal fees, recording fees. It's capped at $5,000 per project. I can tell you that barely starts to cover the cost of those transactional expenses. Anymore, those can be easily $10,000 and sometimes $20,000 in terms of the transaction expenses. But again, there's no state money available for private land trusts in Pennsylvania for the acquisition of the easement, the funds that are utilized to pay the farmer to preserve their land. And then a little bit, we'll talk more about the county and local funding. On the conservation side, on that water quality side, most of this work is driven by goals and policies around the Chesapeake Bay, and a lot of funding that's available for this, originates at the originates at the federal level through the EPA and then flows down through different aspects. To date, we've completed 67 projects. And when we say water quality, this is implementing best management practices on farms to mitigate soil loss and nutrient loss to local waterways and then ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. And we've noted the Environmental Stewardship Fund. That's a fund that's at the state level that receives funding through tipping fees at landfills. It also receives revenue through state lands where there's oil and gas leases that the state has. There's a lot of different other buckets that get funded out of the Environmental Stewardship Fund. For example, the State Farmland Preservation Program receives a portion of the Environmental Stewardship Fund. Growing Greener, another state program, receives a portion of the Environmental Stewardship Fund. So it's a real critical funding mechanism that supports a lot of programs. Most people aren't aware of it. It's not talked about. Usually the programs themselves are more referenced, but the Environmental Stewardship Fund is a really key fund for conservation efforts throughout Pennsylvania. And that, in the state, there's obviously other programs outside of that that fund this water quality work. And then there are some more regional programs. Susquehanna River Basin Commission has a specific grant program that we've been able to utilize to access dollars for doing some of this work. We want to specifically note the Clean Streams Fund. So this is a funding stream at the state level. Current budget, fiscal budget that we're in, I think is the third year that this fund has existed. It's at $50 million a year, and it was created with the largest share of the funding, about 35 million of it or so, to fund what's called the Agricultural Conservation Assistance Program. It's really the first cost share program that Pennsylvania has ever had to provide support to farmers to implement those best management practices. So we have utilized this on a number of different occasions. I think we've done, well, probably well over more than a dozen projects to date utilizing the ACAP funds. There's a current proposal to increase that fund by $25 million. So this is an opportunity. You can reach out to your local legislator, your House representative, Senator Martin or Senator Malone, and, call or an email and just say, I've heard that there's a proposal to increase the Clean Streams Fund by $25 million. I like what that fund does. I would encourage you to support that. It's as easy as that. If you've been watching the news or paying attention to it, the fiscal year 26-27 budget for the state has not been finalized yet. So this is still certainly in play as the legislators on both sides of the aisle are negotiating and horse trading to get a budget across the finish line. This is a particular bill that's out there right now that may become one of those decision points. So advocating for policy change, we always like to advocate and articulate. You essentially can't voice or express your voice for everything, or at least from LFT's perspective, we choose not to utilize our voice for every issue. We are selective in how we utilize our voice for policy-related aspects. Because if you utilize your voice too much, you lose credibility, you lose the impact. And when there's a really, really big issue that's important to you, if you've yelled at everything, you essentially are going to have the level of effectiveness. It's a little bit like the boy cried wolf sort of scenario. So we like to look at it of being, really strategic about when we utilize our voice. And we can help tell you when to utilize your own voice to reach out to your local officials about, what's important when there's a potential threat to funding at the state level or some issue at the federal level. We can provide some guidance there. And common strategies around this is, letter to the editors, emails, phone calls, making visits to your local representative, their district office can really be impactful. Our legislators are not always in Harrisburg. They're in their district at time. They're in their office. They have staff there that are full-time staff that are there to field calls and help constituents. So really take advantage of that. They like to hear from their constituents. So that can really be impactful, as well as, if they're holding town halls or if there's some advocacies or rally days or things like that, or making comments during a public comment period, are all really powerful ways to do that. And it's important to connect with your local representatives. Unfortunately, in today's society, many people choose not to participate, in the public process and interact with their elected officials. And just some minor interaction could really be powerful in terms of influencing them or letting them know what's important to a constituent. And then, some quick tips there is, you want to keep it brief. Don't go all, a detailed, long story about a particular issue. Make it personal is really important. They want to hear from you directly as a constituent. And then, be focused on what those shared goals are, what the overarching objectives are, and always include, an ask. I'd like to hear back from you on X, Y, or Z, or can you tell me how you would view taking action on X, Y, or Z? So that you put some onus on them to have a response back to you, or expressing to them a particular action that you want them to take. So while we've been really successful at preserving farmland in Lancaster County, there's still a lot of farmland that's not preserved. About 70% of the farmland in Lancaster County is still not permanently protected by a conservation easement. And it's why, these local issues really matter because, again, that local land use decision happens at the local level. And that's where land is either developed or not. That's not implications necessarily that are driven by the federal government. There might be policies out there, but when it comes down to does this parcel or that parcel or this piece of property or that piece of property, get developed, that all happens at the local level. That's your local supervisors at your municipal elections who are making those decisions. And it's important to note that the county of Lancaster itself has no land use control. The Lancaster County Planning Commission will provide guidance. They will establish a countywide comprehensive plan, but those are all just guiding documents or recommendations. Your local supervisors are the ones making the decision at the local level. Those are really important. And I think, as we know, once farmland goes away, it never comes back. So it's important that we ensure that farmland remains open and available for agricultural use. So when you think about this local process that happens, every municipality, per the municipality's planning code, is supposed to have, comprehensive plans, official maps, things of that nature. And these are all the really high level discussions that happen that really sets the course for a local municipality in terms of what their land use is going to look like. And I would say, in my experience, this is the part of the local public process that the public participates the least in. Everybody seems to wait until the bulldozers show up on a property to come out in opposition to it, or to come out in opposition when a developer is proposing something on a piece of property. Quite often at that point in time, it's already too late. Because if the developer is proposing a development in an area that is known for that particular development, whether it's residential or commercial, and if they are meeting all the requirements of the zoning ordinance, the elected officials are really in a tough spot to vote no, because they've set a policy under their comprehensive plan, official map, and then their zoning ordinance that this particular parcel of land is, in their view, appropriate for this use. And again, I think that's an area that's really hard for a lot of members of the public to understand, because they think the supervisors always just have the decision at any point in time. And while they do, the reality is if they say no to something that a developer can do by right under the terms of their ordinance, the municipality is likely going to be sued and they're likely going to lose in that case. So it's really important when a municipality is going through the development of their comprehensive plan, which should be a practice they do every 10 years, to participate in that, because they're really looking at long term. What do we envision? Where is future growth going to happen? What are the land uses going to look like in our community? And that plan is that really guiding document that then zoning then falls underneath, as an example. Another real powerful tool is the official map. And again, this is something that most people aren't aware of. Every municipality under the municipal planning code is required to adopt an official map. Do they all do it? Maybe not. But that official map, again, looks at a 10-year horizon at least, in where the municipality sees that they envision either the acquisition or the preservation of land for public purposes. So think about a township and their road infrastructure. On their official map, if they're planning for a new road over the next 10 years, that new road should appear on their official map. It's not built yet, but it should show. And then that becomes an indicator of where the municipality sees growth happening. And, questioning an official map of why does this road infrastructure exist out in the middle of these farm fields? Why are we proposing that? Can start to highlight and bring to the surface these conversations to really then change that potentially. So those are really two elements that most of the public does not become engaged in, and they're really, really critical in terms of setting the stage of how growth happens. Obviously, we want growth to happen inside those planned areas. Generally speaking, you have infrastructure in there, and zoning and some of these other aspects, your subdivision land development ordinance are all the tools to utilize that growth. And by having that growth happen where we identify it's appropriate, where there's existing infrastructure to do that, it provides less pressure on our agricultural areas. And by doing so, it actually creates more time for an organization like Lancaster Farmland Trust then to preserve that land. The reality of it is when we have 300,000 acres of farmland not preserved across Lancaster County, and in 40 years, it's taken us to preserve 38,000 acres, or collectively with the Ag Preserve Board, 126,000 acres, we're going to need some time to be successful at preserving a big chunk of that remaining 300,000 acres. And good local land use policies, good zoning ordinances in place can provide the time to be able to do that. So when then you start coming down from those policy levels, that comprehensive plan, that official map, you have those zoning ordinances in place, you have, subdivision, land development ordinance in place. How the process works is, developer says, there's this piece of property, it's zoned residential. I'm proposing to construct, residential units there. It's going to be mixed use based on the zoning. They present that plan initially to the local municipal planning commission. Depending upon the sophistication of the local municipality, generally, I would say your more affluent municipalities will have professional staff. So that developer may meet with the staff in advance of it coming to one of by the commissions, or one of the committees at the local level, and the staff can provide guidance on, from their perspective, based on the zoning ordinance and policies, whether or not it adheres or doesn't, or suggests change to the developer to make modifications there. When it comes to a planning commission, their responsibility is to review it based on the local policies, but planning commissions are made of volunteers that are appointed by the Board of Supervisors or Board of Commissioners to oversee that process. So this is where, this is the public process starting to take shape, because you now have residents of that municipality sitting on a commission who are reviewing proposals that are going to happen in their community and providing feedback, to the developer on that. But it's also important to know, this is a process where the planning commission can influence change on some of those plans. Can be, they can provide guidance in terms of, well, we like this or we don't like this, or this is just completely out of what we believe is acceptable, before it reaches, an official action by the Board of Supervisors. So it's a really important process. But at the end of the day, it's just a recommending body. They really have no authority over it. Their recommendation is just that to the Board of Supervisors, Borough Council, City Council, whatever it is. And at that level, at your elected official level, is where the decision making happens. That's where, zoning changes are happened, subdivisions are approved, all those sort of things. So by participating in all these levels at these different meetings is where, you as advocates and members of the public of your community can really influence that. Elected officials are looking to hear from the residents. They're looking to hear from the people that they represent in terms of these issues. And then again, just to note, the County Planning Commission is a really good resource for municipalities in terms of their zoning ordinances and providing direction on comprehensive plans, but it's just a recommending body, and they do review proposals that a municipality is facing, a development or whatever it is, and they will provide a recommendation to the township. But the township can factor that in or not, that's purely at their discretion. A couple of things we wanted to note, the difference between zoning, Act 319, and preservation, because quite often we see there's a lot of confusion around this, especially a lot of confusion by members of the public. Agricultural zoning is determined at the local level by the township, and zoning can be temporary. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when the elected body has the control over zoning, that zoning is only as good as the current elected officials representing that municipality. So new board of supervisors, they might have a different direction when it comes to zoning. So zoning is not permanent, but it really guides where development is going to happen. Um, and it applies to over an area. So the agricultural zone may affect, 25, 30, 40, 50 farms as an example. A commercial zoned area might affect multiple parcels that the municipality sees for that particular commercial use. Clean and green, which we experience a lot, gets confused with farmland preservation. So clean and green, also known as Act 319, is a preferential tax assessment. And I would say, generally speaking, most farmers in Lancaster County are enrolling their farms into clean and green because it reduces their property tax burden. And by doing so, they're saying, I'm going to keep my land in agricultural use. And while it's in agricultural use, my benefit is receiving that reduction in my property taxes. But clean and green is not permanent. So it can be, quote, paid back. So that farm that's subject to clean and green for the last 30 years, if the landowner decides to sell it, developer decides to buy it and wants to develop it, that developer can do so when they pay back those 7 years of taxes plus interest that was saved. Obviously, they have to go through all the local municipal process approvals for that. But quite often, and I even hear it from farmers, well, my farm's preserved, it's in clean and green. No, it's not. Next owner can decide I'm going to roll it out of clean and green. We're going to develop it. And clean and green does apply just to an individual farm. So individual property members need to apply for their property to be enrolled into clean and green. And then we have farmland preservation, which again only applies into the individual farm. It's voluntary, but it permanently protects the land from being converted into development, commercial use, industrial use. Permanently protects it for agriculture to exist there. And when it's permanently protected, that conservation easement overrides zoning. That property can be zoned anything. Residential, commercial, industrial, doesn't matter. That easement is going to take precedent over that zoning and say, no, this farm stays as a farm. And Lancaster Farmland Trust is the holder of that easement. It's our legal and fiduciary obligation to enforce that easement and steward it and monitor it to make sure that that happens. Same with clean and green. We see farms that are in clean and green and preserved. They can mutually exist. But if someone takes their farm out of clean and green, but it's still subject to a conservation easement, it's still preserved. So really important distinctions between those three different categories there. We talk about smart growth a lot, which is, an approach to development. And the concept here really is, if we grow in a more sensitive way, if we're looking where infrastructure already exists, and that's where we direct more growth, it provides less pressure on our agricultural areas. Also, directing additional growth into our existing towns and boroughs, into the city of Lancaster, looking at redevelopment of sites, looking at building up instead of out. These are all smart growth principles that, from our perspective at LFT, at the end of the day, if growth is going to happen, which it is, how do we accommodate it in the most strategic way that has the least amount of impact on our agricultural resources, on our farmland out there? And these are ways to do that. So it's the higher density aspects, which again, I've been to a lot of public meetings where higher density housing is being proposed and the public comes out in opposition to it. And while a particular project promoting higher density still needs to have some compatibility with surrounding land uses, it's also a way that we reduce the pressure that's on our agricultural land, encouraging that growth to happen inside of those designated growth areas. So, it helps to prevent sprawl, also helps to prevent sprawling infrastructure that then costs a lot for maintenance over the years. But this is a way, again, where residents and advocates can really advocate for this. When there is a project in your municipality and the developer is proposing high density development, and it's appropriate for that spot, go and support it and say, this is great. This is what we need to do if we want to see our farmland preserved. Because in my experience, a lot of times there's very few voices that are speaking in favor of higher density development. But it is something that we need to accomplish if we're going to, reduce the amount of the loss of farmland that we see in Lancaster County. So where you can make a difference, again, to highlight this, that community planning aspect, those comprehensive plans, that official map, those zoning updates, those are all really, really critical pieces that, again, it's really the stage setting for then what happens in that municipality. Obviously, when individual projects arise, if they're proposing rezoning or if they're proposing some relief or a variance that may go through the zoning hearing board, that's where, again, you can get involved. A lot of times these projects have to go through the zoning hearing board because they want some relief from what the specific zoning ordinance says. And it's also important to note that the zoning hearing board is its own separate entity from the Board of Supervisors. They have their own power. And really, the supervisors have no influence over the zoning hearing board, which is a very unique distinction. It's really one of the only boards that exist at the municipal level that have their own designated power. And when a variance is requested, they have the control over that variance. So participating in zoning hearing boards is really important. They can be extremely boring and long, but it is a really important process. And then the agricultural investments, advocating for preservation for preserving farmland is important, advocating for open space programs. We'll get into referendums in just a bit, but just advocating, as a resident, I pay my taxes. Farmland preservation is important to me. XYZ Township, we don't financially support farmland preservation. Why don't we? We should be doing this. So that sort of advocacy work can really be helpful. And getting your friends and families and neighbors and all them to do that as well. So how do you know when something is happening? Again, driven by the municipality's planning code, townships have to put notices out, public notices on the properties. They also have to put notices out, in the newspaper, which, gone are the days that a lot of people received the local newspaper and looked at it. So it's more challenging, I would say, these days for the public really to be aware and informed of when some of these, important meetings and public hearings are happening. It's really where it becomes important that the individual resident needs to take the responsibility on themselves to go and search out that information. Go to their township website. Almost all of them have their public agendas on there. Yes, it means every month going and looking at the public agenda for your local municipality. But if you want to know what's happening and what the, planning commission is looking at, what the zoning hearing board is contemplating taking decisions on, what the board of supervisors are going to be seeing, being informed by those agendas are a real, essential piece of that. So, that is a real critical way of doing that. And then, comprehensive plan updates, again, if I would say that is, if you hear communication from your municipality about an update or the development or some change to their comprehensive plan, it should be an immediate light bulb moment of this is a meeting that I have to attend to. Because what happened in that comprehensive plan can really change the course of what the land use looks like in your local community. So, and the earlier you know about these issues, the more you can become engaged and involved, the more you can advocate to others in your community to get more engaged and involved. And how to take action. It's really important to act early. If you're waiting until construction happens and the bulldozers show up, it's too late. Often it's too late when a developer is showing up with a proposal and they're proposing a residential development in an area zoned for residential growth. Often at that point, it's too late. Attend the public meetings, ask questions, share your perspective, be respectful, be thankful of your supervisors who are all volunteers who are, committing their time there. It's not an easy job to have, depending upon the size of the municipality. In some cases, these supervisors, it's literally a second job for them. And they're dealing with a lot of different issues. What I've seen in my experience, you have individuals run for supervisors based on a singular issue, and then they get into office and they realize there is a whole host of things that they have to deal with that they might not really have a background in or be informed or really, feel lost in. So, offering compliments to them for their investment in their local community can really just build a lot of just good moral one-to-one relationship with your supervisor so that when you do express a concern, they take you seriously. So that's important. And follow up with them. You can reach out to your local supervisors really at any point in time. Almost all of them these days have a township email that they should be checking, or staff at the township is checking, and then passing it along to them. So you don't have to be an expert in the field to have an impact. You just have to be active and willing to share your voice to have an impact. Advocating for local funding and why it really matters. So preserving farmland costs money. It does. We have to have funds and we have to have willing landowners to do that. One of our significant barriers at LFT in really advancing farmland preservation is resources. Currently, right now, we have 53 farm families on a waiting list that has a price tag of approaching $7 million in terms of what it would take to preserve those farms. That's a lot of money for us to raise. While our team does a good job at raising dollars, we do a good job of recruiting people in. It takes a lot of $100 contributions to raise $7 million. So we're constantly looking at different strategies and ways where we can generate more significant sums of resources to preserve farmland at a faster pace than what we have in the past. And at the local level, when it comes to our townships, when it comes down to it, while most of our townships are pretty frugal, they try and be very responsible, with resources. When you have the power and authority of a tax base, it provides additional opportunities in that regard. So, in my opinion, there's no reason that every municipality in Lancaster County can't be contributing $50,000 a year to farmland preservation. If a municipality can't muster up an additional $50,000 of investment of their community, they're doing something wrong, in my opinion. And I've heard other local elected officials make that comment. So they can just budget for dollars for farmland preservation. If they don't want to do that, in the sense of the elected body making that decision on their own, another way to do it is to put it out to voter referendum. And this is where this local supervisors approve a quote ordinance that authorizes a question to go on the local ballot, and then it shows up to the voters, and if the voters vote up or down on it. But generally those voter referendums, it's identifying a particular goal. These are commonly referred to as open space referendums. Gonna see I'm pause there because I'm getting ahead of myself there. The next slide, we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But you can also push for water quality funding by a local municipality. A lot of these projects on the water quality side, we have to look for match dollars to the grant dollars that we get. And there's strings that they can't be federal dollars or they can't be state dollars. So having some local dollars would also be helpful. And another area where you can push is with the Lancaster County Challenge Grant that we received from the Lancaster County Commissioners. Reaching out to the commissioners and saying, I like that you fund farmland preservation. I like that you offer a challenge grant to Lancaster Farmland Trust. It's great that you do $250,000. Can't we do more? Farmland preservation is important in Lancaster County. We should be doing more than that. That's an area where you can advocate to the county commissioners. And I would say at this point in time, if you're following what's happening at the county level, the county is looking at making the greatest investment in a capital project that the county has ever made in its history, in a brand new prison that what I've been hearing has a price tag associated with it that's probably pushing around $500 million. The county is going to have to borrow money. They're going to have to issue bonds to be able to pay for that investment. In the past, when there was a lot of farmland being preserved in Lancaster County in the early 2000s, the county commissioners, when they had to take a bond out for a particular project, let's say it was the Youth Intervention Center as an example, and I'm using, these aren't accurate numbers, but maybe they had to take a bond for $60 million. They would take a bond for $70 million and put 10 of it into farmland preservation and make that available. There's no reason that the commissioners couldn't do that today when they are exploring taking bonds out for a prison. And again, my perspective, I don't think most taxpayers like this idea of their tax dollars going to fund a new prison. I think taxpayers would much rather like their dollars going to have some other positive impact, being, supporting farmland preservation. So there's a real opportunity right there. So that would be, I would say, short-term issue. You could reach out to commissioners, and say, hey, we know we got to build a prison. We know you're going to have to borrow money. Can't we borrow some money for farmland preservation too? And just sort of propose that as a question to them. So back to the voter referendum. So essentially, voters take action on it. Generally, these voter referendums are called open space referendums, where you ask a question of the voters that basically say, are you willing to impose or increase XYZ tax? A lot of the times it's the earned income tax. And the funds generated from it will be restricted for XYZ purpose, preservation of farmland, acquisition of, municipal park space, whatever it may be, for the local community. These dollars are only utilized in the local municipality. It's only been attempted once in Lancaster County in East Hempfield Township in the early 90s, and it failed. But if we look to the east, you look at the collar counties around Philadelphia, almost all of those in Chester County alone, half of the municipalities have gone through an open space referendum, and they're generating dollars at the local level to permanently protect land at the local level. So it's a real powerful way that if a local community wants to see farmland preserved in their township, they got to put up their own money for it. But, that cost is spread over the entire tax base there. And a minor increase, the cost of $30 a year for the individual taxpayer, when you apply that out, might generate $500,000 in revenue for preserving farmland, as an example. So it's a real powerful. We're starting to test it out throughout the community. I don't think it works in every municipality. Some of your more rural communities that aren't feeling development pressure, I'm not sure that there's probably the support there for it, but some of the more affluent communities where there's more disposable income, where they've seen a lot of development pressures, there might be some possibilities there. So what to say when you're making your case, for your call or email, obviously express your local tie. If you're reaching out to your, local House representative, say, I'm a constituent. This is where I live. Let them know that you are a resident there. Bring to their attention whatever the specific aspect is, so if that's, I think we should be doing more for farmland preservation. At the next time when the Board of Supervisors consider a budget, I highly encourage you to contemplate and figure out how you can budget in $50,000 for farmland preservation. Simple as that. And then connect it to a shared goal. And this is an area where we can be helpful. We have informational public opinion polls that we have done and others have done that highly indicates that the community really supports farmland preservation. We can talk more generally about the county as a whole. So we can be helpful with some of those aspects, and use examples, if you can. And again, we can do that. So it can really be easy, and utilize LFT as a resource for you to be able to go through that so that you feel empowered. So every resident can make a difference by staying informed and participating, probably the two biggest things, by supporting farmland preservation funding or encouraging additional funding for it, and then getting out there and encouraging those smart growth policies, or again, voicing support for those types of principles and policies when particular projects show up. Okay, now to the Q&A section. So I will open it up if anyone has questions, certainly happy to take them. Or if something I said wasn't clear, also happy to take questions there as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the presentation. And this may go off in a different direction. You can tell me if it's not the right place, but do you see some of the direction you've given us in terms of advocacy to help us in the data center kind of threat that's out there for a lot of our rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same philosophy and process applies. I would say the one challenging aspect with the data center component is most zoning ordinances to date do not reference data centers.
Right.
So when proposed, they have to revert to a more generic, quote, warehouse sort of classification to it. I mean, my understanding is some municipalities at least are being more proactive and trying to come up with, a data center ordinance. And I believe the County of Lancaster, through the planning department, is helping to provide some assistance on a model ordinance there. But the same approach can apply. Like I said, the one challenging aspect is data centers are a new, quote, use. So they don't fit nicely into historically what we've seen. And generically, they fall into a, quote, warehouse, which is not always the best.
Right. Thank you for that. It seems to me that, I mean, I've been participating in my local municipality in terms of a couple meetings and talking about this, but I'm curious now about our comprehensive plan that you talked about. What does that say? And maybe updating that. So, but this presentation has been helpful for me. Thank you.
Good.
I believe we had another hand.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Andy Shankar. I'm new to the whole Lancaster farmland preservation group, and I was fascinated in terms of what you guys are doing. And today's presentation was more towards more of a public policy and how you get involved and influence the path you're going to take to change that direction. So I'm looking for another more of an information how I could get involved. I'm from Chester County, a little bit far away, but fascinated in terms of what you guys are doing and would love to learn more about this.
Yeah, sure. Well, welcome to Lancaster County and welcome to Lancaster Farmland Trust, and thanks for your engagement. We certainly can provide, information, Claire and Stephanie on our team can provide information about opportunities to get, more involved with Lancaster Farmland Trust and provide some direction in terms of resources to check out to learn more about the organization. Our website is a great one, as an example, or going and, looking up our 990 as an example is a great way, to learn about a nonprofit organization as well. So certainly, I'm going to assume here from Claire and Stephanie that we have your email contact information and we can reach out.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Great. Just wanted to highlight, I threw our website link in the chat. We'll also be following up with an email to everyone where we'll have more information. We'll also link to another resource we have about talking about our work, which will share more information about how you can get involved there.
Thank you.
Bonnie, I see your hands up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. All right. The water quality thing has always been a big issue for me, and we had gone through different avenues in the past about this. And just recently, actually, within the last hour, we've had three storms that have come through, and our driveway looks like a really nice stream. How can I approach maybe the township to address this? Because we're getting a lot of rain off of the main road on Hostler Road here. And like I said, these last three storms, our driveway looks like a nice stream and has been eroding our driveway. Again, how do I approach the township about this?
Yeah, that's, great question, Bonnie. And, we hear lots of different issues over the years. Farmers have Unfortunately, the historic way how things were built was you build the development and then you direct all the stormwater to the local farm field.
Mhm.
And fortunately, some of those practices have changed over the years. But I think your first approach, there is probably reaching out to the supervisor, if you know one of them, that would be a good first approach to just have the conversation about you're experiencing this issue during these storm events. Can the roadmaster come out and take a look to see if there's something, I don't know what the condition is along the road there, if there's any culverts or if there's any ditches, maybe they haven't regularly been cleaned. But I would suggest that's probably the approach is to reach out. Bonnie, remind me which township you're in again?
Rapo Township.
Okay. So you could reach out to the manager as well.
Mhm.
And just question that, express your concern. And then, my specific ask there would be, can you have the roadmaster or the director of public works come and visit me at our farm so I can show them, what we're experiencing? I mean, that's how I would approach it. I would be pretty direct in requesting that someone from the township come out and meet with you.
Okay, great. And again, thank you for the presentation. It was very well done.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Well, if there aren't any, I'll say if anything comes up after this workshop, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer questions and can talk more about, how you can get involved with some of these issues. But in that case, we can wrap up here. So just to highlight, like we mentioned, this is part of a series of workshops. So we do have additional workshops coming up this year. Our next one will be a little ways out in November. That'll be about social media, how you can be more active with sharing our mission and our work, especially ahead of Extra Give. So that'll be a really great time to plug in there. And then our last workshop will be in December on land protection. So really hope to see you at those later this year. We also, the link that was just shared also links to our previous workshop recordings. And so we did have a session on tabling and outreach. The recording is available on our website, and we'll have this recording available for you as well. Like I mentioned at the top, we'll be sharing this out in just a few days here once we have that recording posted. So thank you so much again, all, for joining us today. We really appreciate the great questions, and we know, it's great to have people who care so much about these issues locally. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. And again, feel free to reach out, if you need help or guidance. Again, feel free to use us as a resource. And, Claire referenced it, but for me, really appreciate your advocacy for farmland preservation and Lancaster Farmland Trust. It takes an army to advance this, and we're fortunate to have individuals in the community who are really passionate about it. So thank you.